If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The world did not end with a bang or a roar. It ended with the sound of falling snow. But this snow was different. It was a mixture of frozen mist and the fine, gray ash of a million cremated dreams. King's Landing was no longer a city. It was a geographic scar. The fires of Cersei, Gilded Mercy, had burned so hot that they had baked the very soil into a hard, glass-like substance. Jon Snow walked through the ruins of what used to be the Lion's Gate. He looked like a man who had crawled out of his own grave. His cloak was a tattered rag of crow-black fur, and Longclaw hung heavy at his side, a weapon with no enemies left to fight. The silence of Highgarden had spread like a plague, and as Jon walked, the only sound was the crunch of his boots on the calcified remains of the capital. He wasn't looking for survivors. Experience had taught him that Cersei Lannister did not leave survivors. He was looking for a reason to keep breathing. In the center of the ruins, where the Great Hall once stood, the air still shimmered with a ghostly, residual heat. There, perched atop a pile of rubble that used to be a grand staircase, sat Daenerys Targaryen. She was unrecognizable. The Silver Queen was now the Burnt Queen. Her hair was a jagged, silver-white fuzz, her skin tanned and scarred by the backdraft of the wildfire. She didn't look like a conqueror. She looked like a statue of grief. Drogon lay curled around her, his wings tattered and his breathing a wet, raspy rattle. The black dragon was dying, not from wounds, but from the toxic air of a city that had been turned into a chemical furnace. Jon stopped 10 paces from her. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind whistled through the ribs of the ruined Red Keep, a sound that mimicked the screaming of the dead. "You stayed," Jon said, his voice sounding like grinding stones. Daenerys didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the gilded throne, the mass of melted gold and iron that sat in the center of the wasteland. "I waited for the fire to go out," she whispered. I thought if I waited long enough, the world I came to save would reappear beneath the ash. But it's just more ash, Jon, all the way down." "She won, Dany," Jon said, stepping closer. "Even in death, she won. She turned us into her reflection. You burned the city to kill her, and I stood by and let the world turn green. We are the Lion's Mercy now." Daenerys finally looked at him. Her eyes, once full of the great game and the breaker of chains, were now as empty as the vaults of Highgarden. "I saw her, Jon, at the very end. She wasn't afraid. She looked at the fire like it was a long-lost friend. She didn't die a queen, she died as the fire itself. How do you rule a people who saw their god turn into a monster?" "There are no people left to rule," Jon replied, gesturing to the empty horizon. "The north is a graveyard of ice. The south is a graveyard of ash. The Iron Bank has withdrawn to Essos, and the sea is full of dead ships. We aren't queens and kings anymore. We're just the last 2 people on a sinking ship." He sat down on a charred stone opposite her. The irony was not lost on him. The dragon and the direwolf, the 2 symbols of Westerosi hope, meeting in the shadow of a Lannister's madness. "I found Jaime," Jon said after a long silence. "And Cersei, they were under the gold, they looked peaceful, like they had planned for this from the day they were born." Daenerys let out a dry, hacking laugh. "They were the only ones who knew the truth, weren't they? That the world isn't a place for heroes. It's a place for monsters. And the biggest monster of all wasn't the Night King. It was the woman who sat on this chair and decided that if she couldn't have the world, she would burn the map." As the sun, a pale, sickly disk behind the soot clouds, began to set, a new sound reached them. It wasn't the roar of a dragon or the scream of a soldier. It was a low, rhythmic howling. From the northern ruins, a pack of wolves emerged. Not the small, starving wolves of the south, but massive, gray direwolves, led by a white beast with eyes like rubies. Ghost had come to find his master. The wolves didn't growl. They didn't hunt. They simply moved through the ruins like gray smoke. They were the new masters of King's Landing. Nature was reclaiming the city of the lions. "Even the wolves have come to see the end," Daenerys said, reaching out a scarred hand toward Ghost. The wolf sniffed her fingers, his cold, wet nose a stark contrast to the heat of the ruins. He didn't bite. There was no meat left on her worth taking. Jon looked at the wolves, then at the dragon, and finally at the woman who had meant everything and nothing to him. He realized that the dance of dragons was over, and the age of wolves was a lie. This was the age of ash. "We have to go, Dany," Jon said. "We can't stay here. The wildfire is still leaking into the wells. The air is poison. If we stay, we'll just be 2 more statues for the next age to find." "Go where?" she asked. "Anywhere where the ground isn't black," Jon said. "East, west, it doesn't matter. We leave the throne, we leave the names, we leave the debt." They spent the night in the ruins, sharing a small piece of dried horsemeat that Jon had carried from the north. It was a meager meal for the supposed rulers of the world. Drogon watched them with his one good eye, a silent sentinel of a dead era. As they ate, the wind picked up, blowing a piece of a Lannister banner across the courtyard. It was scorched, the golden lion's head torn in half, but it still looked proud. It was a reminder that even in ruin, Cersei's shadow was longer than their lives. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Daenerys asked as she watched the embers of their small fire. "In 100 years, or will they only talk about the woman who turned the sky green?" "They'll talk about the fire," Jon said. "People always remember the fire. They never remember the people who tried to put it out. The 2 of them, the dragon and the direwolf, are tiny specks of heat in a vast, frozen, and blackened world. Above them, the stars are invisible behind the layer of Cersei's soot. The silence of Highgarden had finally achieved its ultimate goal, a world where the only stories left were whispered by the wind. The journey out of the central ruins of King's Landing was a descent into a labyrinth of glass and bone. Jon and Daenerys moved through the streets of what was once the shadow of the Aegon's high hill. The heat had been so intense here that the cobblestones had fused into a slick, obsidian-like surface, reflecting the gray sky like a dark mirror. Every few hundred yards, they came across shadows, human outlines etched into the stone walls where people had been standing when the wildfire caches detonated. "She didn't just kill them," Daenerys whispered, her hand resting on the hilt of a dagger she had scavenged from the debris. "She erased their very memory. There isn't even enough left of them to bury." Jon didn't answer. He was watching the ground. In the cracks of the fused stone, a strange, glowing liquid was seeping upward. It wasn't the vibrant, aggressive emerald of a fresh wildfire explosion. It was a dull, poolsing neon green, thick as honey and smelling of ancient death. "The wells," Jon said, stopping by a shattered fountain. "The wildfire didn't all explode. Some of it leaked. It's gotten into the water table. The very earth of this city is poisoned." As they reached the district that had once housed the Guild of Alchemists, the ground began to vibrate. It wasn't an earthquake, but a rhythmic, thumping sound coming from deep underground, like a giant's heartbeat. "Drogon," Daenerys called out. The black dragon, who had been following them from the rooftops, let out a low, warning hiss. He sensed it too. They followed the vibrations to a massive sinkhole where the guild hall had once stood. Peering over the edge, they saw a terrifying sight. Beneath the city, in the ancient tunnels and dragon passages, sat a motherlode of wildfire. It was a massive, glowing lake of green liquid, hundreds of feet wide. It was a green sun buried in the dark. She kept a backup, Jon realized, his face pale in the reflected green light. If the dragons failed, if the army failed, she was going to sink the entire peninsula. This isn't just a leak, Dany, it's a fuse, and it's still burning. The heat rising from the pit was suffocating. It was a dry, chemical heat that made their eyes water and their skin itch. Cersei's silence was not a finished event. It was a lingering promise of total annihilation. If this lake ignited, the explosion would be felt as far as the Eyrie. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was thin, reedy, and sounded like dry parchment being torn. Jon and Daenerys spun around, weapons drawn. Emerging from the ruins of a collapsed apothecary shop was a figure so gaunt and burnt that he looked like a walking corpse. His robes were tatters of gray and black, and his skin was a patchwork of scars. But it was the eyes, sharp, intelligent, and utterly mad. That gave him away. Qyburn, Daenerys hissed, her hand tightening on her blade. You survived. The former hand of the queen let out a wheezing cackle. He leaned on a staff made of a charred dragon rib. Survived is a strong word, my queen. I am a lingering symptom of a dead age, like the wildfire below us. How are you still alive? Jon asked, his hand on Longclaw. I knew the geography of the flames, Qyburn said, gesturing to the ruins around him. I built the traps. I knew where the cold spots were. I watched from the subvaults as the lioness took the sky. It was beautiful, a masterpiece of biology and alchemy. You helped her destroy the world, Daenerys said, stepping toward him with a cold fury. You fed her madness with your science. Madness? Qyburn tilted his head. No, it was evolution. Cersei understood that the world of lords and ladies was a failing organism. She decided to accelerate the rot. She didn't want to rule, she wanted to transcend. And she did. She is the green light in the sky. She is the heat in your bones. Qyburn walked to the edge of the wildfire pit, looking down at the glowing lake with a look of religious devotion. That lake below is her heart. It is the debt of blood that can never be paid. If you try to leave, if you try to build a new world, it will eventually find you. The wildfire is in the clouds now. It will rain green on the reach. It will snow green in the north. We can neutralize it, Jon said. There has to be a way to drain it or bury it. With what? Qyburn laughed. You have a dying dragon and a broken sword. You are relics, Jon Snow. The age of the direwolf and the dragon ended the moment the first wildfire flask hit Highgarden. This is the age of the alchemist now, and I am its only priest. Qyburn reached into his robes and pulled out a small, glass vial. It was filled with a liquid that was even brighter than the lake below, a concentrated seed of the wildfire. She gave me one final task, Qyburn whispered, his eyes fixed on Daenerys. She told me that if the Silver Queen ever returned to the ruins, I was to give her a final greeting. A lion's mercy for the one who thought she could be a savior. He moved to smash the vial against the stone, intending to trigger the entire lake below. Before Qyburn's hand could move, Ghost was upon him. The white direwolf was a blur of fur and teeth. He didn't growl, he simply launched himself from the shadows, his jaws snapping shut around Qyburn's throat. The vial flew from Qyburn's hand, spinning through the air like a falling star. Jon lunged, his body moving with the instinct of a man who had spent his life in the trenches. He caught the vial inches from the ground, his fingers trembling as he clutched the fragile glass. Qyburn fell back into the dust, his lifeblood staining the gray ash a dark, wet crimson. He looked up at the sky, a final, twisted smile on his lips. It doesn't matter, he wheezed. The fire is already in you. With a final rattle, the man who had helped Cersei birth her monsters was dead. Jon stood up, holding the vial of wildfire. He looked at Daenerys, and in that moment, the weight of their situation became unbearable. They were standing over a bomb that could erase the continent, holding the lifeblood of their greatest enemy in their hands. He was right about one thing, Daenerys said, looking at the dead Maester. We can't just walk away. If we leave this here, someone else will find it. Another Cersei. Another madman. The world will never be safe as long as the lion's mercy exists. Then we end it, Jon said. We use Drogon. We use the last of the dragon fire to trigger a controlled burn. We melt the tunnels. We bury the green sun under the weight of the mountain. It will destroy the rest of the city, Jon, Daenerys noted. Everything that's left, the archives, the history, even the bodies of your family in the crypts of the Sept. There is no history left to save, Dany, Jon said, looking at the vial. There is only the choice between a clean end and a lingering poison. The green light from the wildfire lake illuminates Jon and Daenerys from below, making them look like emerald ghosts. Above them, Drogon lets out a long, mournful roar, sensing the final task ahead. The silence of Highgarden was about to become a permanent, subterranean tomb, and the dragon and the direwolf were the only ones left to close the door. The air in the subvaults of King's Landing was no longer breathable. It was a caustic soup of sulfur and the lingering magic of the alchemist's guild. Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen stood on the precipice of the green sun, the underground lake of wildfire that pulsed with a life of its own. It was Cersei's final, silent heartbeat, a ticking clock that threatened to finish what she had started. "If we do this," Daenerys said, her voice echoing off the scorched stone, "there is no coming back. We aren't just destroying the city, we're destroying the seat of power. There will be no Iron Throne for anyone ever again." "Good," Jon replied. He looked at the vial in his hand, then at the glowing abyss below. The throne was built on the fire of Aegon the Conqueror. It's only fitting it ends with the fire of the last Lannister. The cycle has to break, Dany. If it doesn't break now, it will just turn into a different kind of cage. They emerged from the sinkhole back into the gray light of the surface. Drogon was waiting, his massive head resting on a pile of rubble. He was weak, his scales dull and his eyes clouded by the toxins of the city. He knew what was required. The bond between a dragon and its rider was not just of blood, but of shared destiny. "He won't survive the blast," Daenerys whispered, her hand trembling as she stroked Drogon's snout. "The heat from the wildfire lake, it's too much even for him. He's the last one, Jon. When he goes, the magic goes with him." "He's already dying, Dany," Jon said gently. "Look at him. He's a king in a world with no sky left to fly in. Let him go out as the shield of the world, not as a scavenger in the ruins." Daenerys leaned her forehead against the dragon's cold scales. She spoke to him in Valyrian, a soft, melodic lament that sounded like the wind through the tall grass of the Dothraki Sea. She thanked him for the flight, for the fire, and for being the only child she would ever truly have. Drogon let out a low, vibrating hum, a sound of acceptance. He stood up, his joints popping like dry timber, and looked toward the sinkhole. Jon and Daenerys retreated to the safety of the mud gate, nearly a mile away. Jon held the vial of concentrated wildfire, the seed Qyburn had intended for their destruction. "Now," Jon said. He hurled the vial with all his strength toward the center of the ruins. As it shattered against the stone, a small, brilliant spark of emerald light erupted. Drogon took flight one last time. He didn't soar, he struggled, his wings beating the heavy, ash-filled air with a desperate strength. He hovered directly over the sinkhole, his silhouette black against the gray sky. With a roar that shook the very foundation of the peninsula, a roar that carried the grief of 3 centuries of Targaryen history, he unleashed his fire. The orange flame of the dragon met the green seed of the wildfire. The reaction was instantaneous. The ground beneath the city didn't just crack, it heaved. A pillar of emerald and gold light erupted from the earth, rising thousands of feet into the air, piercing the soot clouds and for a brief, beautiful moment, revealing the blue sky above. The green sun was being consumed. The subterranean tunnels collapsed in a series of rhythmic explosions, burying the wildfire beneath millions of tons of stone. The heat was so intense that the very air turned to glass. In the center of the inferno, Drogon vanished. He didn't burn, he became the fire. He was the final sacrifice, the ultimate lion's mercy turned into a Targaryen's redemption. When the sun rose the next day, the green sun was gone. The vibrations had stopped. The air, though still cold and smelling of ash, felt lighter. The lingering poison of Cersei's reign had been neutralized, buried under the weight of the city she had loved and destroyed. Jon and Daenerys stood on the shore of the Blackwater. Behind them, King's Landing was no longer a ruin. It was a flat, glassy plain of obsidian and ash. Nothing would ever grow there again. It was a monument to the end of an era. "What now?" Daenerys asked. She looked toward the east, toward the narrow sea. "We do what she couldn't," Jon said. "We disappear. We leave the story behind. The world will find its own way now. It won't be a world of dragons or lions. It will be a world of men, for better or worse." They found a small, sturdy fishing boat that had survived the blockade in a hidden cove. There were no sailors to guide them, no banners to fly. Just the 2 of them and a white wolf who sat at the prow, looking toward the horizon. As they pushed off from the shore, the camera pans out, showing the entire coast of Westeros. The silence of Highgarden was still there, the The fields were still empty, the castles still charred, but the sky was clear. The green tint was gone. We see them sailing away, a tiny speck on a vast gray ocean. They weren't going to a throne. They weren't going to a war. They were simply going. In the very center of the glassy plain, a single, tiny green sprout pushes through a crack in the obsidian. It's not a rose, and it's not a lion's tail. It's a simple blade of grass. The wind blows, and for a second, we hear a faint, distant sound. It's not the roar of a dragon or the scream of a queen. It's the sound of a bird singing, the first one in a long, long time. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.